Nice to see you, Sarah. Yeah.
Nice to see you, Tom.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, our affiliation goes very long back. Actually, I though I was not there when you presented the paper that's sort of become, I think, one of the most well-known and mostly downloaded and read papers, the 12 roles of systems engineering. This I recall was in 96. I remember bring this up in 98 when I was doing a report on systems engineering here in Sweden together with Bud Lawson, a very good friend of ours, both of us, who was the architect at that time, was doing the architecting role of the 1528 standard. And we wanted to, say something about what is the role of systems engineering. And this can be very, very handy. But it will be interesting just to know why this paper? What sort of got you to because I mean 12 rows, it just sounds a whole lot. Shouldn't be one row.
It's an interesting question. I was sitting there in a conference in the Washington metropolitan area where I was living at the time. And we had asked a couple of different presenters to present what is the value of systems engineering. People were talking about different things. And I realized that as I was listening. There was a guy from the Defense Department talking about a kind of systems engineering that was more oversight. And there are people from the academic groups, the colleges in the area that were talking about something different. And then there were people from the contractors that were talking about something that was a little bit more hands-on. And I realized that they weren't talking about the same thing. And I said, no, we're not talking, we're talking about the value of different things. And so what I did is I went through the one and only edition of the Systems Engineering Journal at the time. It turned out that that was the first journal that had subsequently there's only one version of the issue of that journal, and it's restarted a couple years later under what's now the Systems Engineering Journal. But they had invited papers from a number of different sources that you probably heard of, like Barry Bain, I believe, but George Friedman, a lot of people who aren't around anymore, Elliot Axelman. And I went through and I read that paper, those papers, each one, and I said, what are they assuming that systems engineering is? I'm from the point of view of what are they saying or assuming that systems engineering does? Not systems engineers so much, but it tended to be, what does a systems engineer do? Or what does the group systems engineering assume to do? And I started making bins, buckets. What do the people who are systems engineers, what do we assume they do? And some, like the government people, assume they did configuration management. Other people assume they did, logistics. And they definitely weren't all the same. And I ended up writing this paper. And if you read the original paper, you'll see that no two papers assumed the same thing. No role was assumed by everybody. USC, which had Eberhard Rechten and George Friedman both working there, assumed that those two assumed almost completely different things. And I talked to Mark Mayer, who was a very close colleague of Eberhard Rechten, in fact, took over his Art of System Architecting. And he said there's a reason for that USC divided the world of systems into two different things, system architecting and system engineering. And that the Rechten part was the architecting part, and the George Friedman was the implementing or systems engineering part. I'm sorry, my hands are kind of going outside. And so Rechten's point of view was the architecting or the envisioning part, and Friedman's part was the implementing part, and that's the engineering. So that paper kind of told what those bins were. They didn't say, you must do this. They said, here is a kind of a menu of things people think systems engineers do. That's all it was. But as you can tell, it grew much bigger than that with time.
Right. Yeah, it did. So, but so what's and I think we're coming to that, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, I've got this on the
have,
slides
have
too.
you followed this over the years now in and
All right, so should I switch to my slides at this point? I've already kind of talked to one of them.
yeah, sure, that would be
Okay.
cool.
I think this should work. Tell me if it works.
Yeah, we are.
Okay. So let's see. How do I, let's see, does this change slides? Does this change slides? No. How do we change slides? Next slide, maybe that one.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
The original paper was never intended to say what systems engineers should do. Instead it was first it was 10 bins, and then I realized there was an extra one I should pull out, and it ended up with 12 bins, including an other. And I mentioned the paper caught on. You said you know, it's well known, but in early 2000s, I kind of surveyed, and there were more than 20 universities that required the reading of this paper in at least one course. This year, a couple months ago, the ResearchGate, if you're familiar with that, site, it had told me that there were over 20,000 reads of this paper on that site alone. And that only started 10 years ago. So by the time, or less than 10 years ago, but by the time ResearchGate started, the paper was already almost 20 years old. So it's kind of boggling my mind. So what I want to go through is, for each of the papers that I have collected that purported to revisit this paper over 28 years, what did they say should be changes? And then I'll talk about the fact that what finally kicked me off my chair and said, all right, let's update this paper. I have submitted a paper to a conference. I'm not going to say which one, and it hasn't been accepted at this point. I mean, they're in the judgment period right now, and so I can't give you the paper itself, but I will talk to you about what I've done with that paper, updating the original 12 rules. But I'll talk about what each paper of these 5-ish suggested I update, and then what I've done with those suggestions. So the first was in 2000, somebody in the Washington metro area asked me to update the paper. It's 4 years later. And I reluctantly said, okay, I'll look at it. And I came up with no update needed. I did say that somebody has suggested we add an educator role. And I think that was somebody who was in the academic field and said, well, you left me out. And somebody also, and I think the same person or maybe somebody else suggested we add an evangelist role, saying somebody who goes out and says it's systems engineering is important and you all should be doing more of it. And I kind of put a footnote, not really a footnote, but a side comment in that paper saying maybe these should be added, but not now. Okay. So I moved those over here. And then in 2013, Avigdor Sonnenschein and friends from Israel did another update. They basically didn't update these except to say system designers should be split into design and architecture. They did suggest that split, but they also added one that they called innovator and initiator. You'd have to read the original paper to see what they thought about that. But somebody who, it comes up again in one of these papers, somebody who really starts things. I'll move them over here now as I go to the next paper. In 2017, Nicole Hutchison, Art Peister, and friends from the Systems Engineering Research Center at Stevens in New Jersey, they did a couple of things that I really appreciate. The first is they brought a lot of people in to talk about roles. They did this for the purpose of work they're doing on something called Helix, which you may have heard of. But they brought a whole community in to review what the roles were. And so I really appreciate the community focus. Up until now, it was kind of me and what I thought. I know some people, for example, like me, really like the word glue because we felt that it had kind of almost an emotional thing. This is important. It glues things together. However, the community didn't like it as a whole. They felt it was, I don't know, maybe too emotional or something. And so her team renamed that to system integrator role. And they also didn't like logistics and ops because they said that sounds like a different role altogether. Let's call it support engineer. They came up with a couple others that you might have heard already: instructor teacher, which sounds like the 2001, and systems engineering champion, which sounds like the evangelist role here. They also came up with something called concept creator, which is basically a very, very early architect before there's even a program. Actually, I would say it's a cross between this innovator and what did they call it? Let's see, innovator initiator role from the 2013 paper, and a create and an architect. So before you even have a program, you're just thinking of something, you create a concept. So that's what the 2017 suggested new role is. They also agreed with the folks who said we should split system designer into designer and architect. And as I mentioned, they changed a couple of names. But the other thing they did that was new is they said they split the roles into a focus on the system, which is a requirements, design, system analysis, V&V, this support, what I call logistics and ops, what I call glue, system integrator, and their concept creator. Those are actually building the system. The team, what's their name for it? The focus on the team is the customer interface, the technical manager, and information manager. And then process, which is the process engineer and the system engineering champion. I'm not sure I really agree with this information manager as being a team thing. But anyway, so I really appreciate some of the things that they have done in this. But I still, at that point, wasn't motivated to go and change my paper. Another thing you'll notice is each one of these didn't build on the other changes. They went back to the original paper to suggest changes. So I'm moving them over here. And then the one that really did motivate me to go and make a change, although because of the pandemic, I was very slow at doing anything, was this paper came out in 2019 by Iris Graessler. I'm not sure I can say her name properly, et al. In Germany. I think this was presented in the Netherlands. They really did an update, a major update, but they came up in particular with two roles that, upon reading it, I realized are very necessary today. The first is modeling engineer, because of the change in 28 years of systems engineering from being primarily document focused to primarily model based, if not entirely model based. And the extreme importance of particularly cybersecurity compared to back then. These two new roles it convinced me, it pushed me over the edge. Yes, the old roles don't fit anymore. We have to have these two new roles in particular. So because of this, I actually presented this paper in my panel discussion last year, which was my only contribution to the symposium last year. And in fact, the backup slides on this package are from that. So I have more information on how these two papers fit. But they also, let's see, they took the requirements owner basically maps to their requirements engineer and a lot of modeling, because of course you're going to model requirements. The system designer maps to their system architect and a lot of modeling. The system analyst, I think, maps exclusively to modeling engineer. V&V, logistics and ops, they changed the name, but they titled it lifecycle engineer, which I like a lot better than the previous these folks called it support engineer. Support can mean anything. Life cycle is pretty clear. Glue, they also name changed. So I'm unwillingly, I mean, willingly, but sadly giving up the name glue in this new set of roles to system integrator, system integration manager.
Yeah,
They've
that was
renamed,
nice.
sorry?
No, I mean, I think that really catched on. It sort of stuck to you, right?
It stuck to you.
Yeah.
Imagine that, Tom. It stuck to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
glue. Mhm.
Thanks for the bilingual pun here or something. Customer interface, they're changing to stakeholder interface. And I don't have a problem with that because especially as we move to more and more software, there's customers, there's users, there's all sorts of different kinds of stakeholders. So I don't have a problem with that. Technical manager as a word has been surprisingly resilient. Everybody understands technical manager. They have also added the term leader, which it kind of tickled me because many years ago when I was young, I was kind of a proponent of the difference between management, which is telling people what to do and making sure they're doing it on time, and leadership, which is leading, I picture, where's my camera? I'm holding up a torch for people to follow and encourage, and they put that in there. And I'm thinking, man, I wish I thought of that. But nobody ever talks about leadership really. And it's important. So I've mapped that to that. They also left out coordinator, which I mapped to both of these, but the coordinator kind of maps more to what the leader does, although it's really kind of mixed in there. Their information manager is worth talking about a little bit. In 1996, I made up the term. It really did not exist. I combined configuration management, data management, and metrics, and I called it, what should I call it? Let's call it management of information. Today, information management has a meaning, and it's different from what I made up. So they kept that meaning and the name, and they added back configuration management. I sort of think that's fair, but I kept it as an information manager. Eventually, we may decide that IM means such a specific thing that we have to throw CM back in there as a role, or people won't do it. They'll just do the more narrow meaning of IM. I don't know. We'll see. Process engineer, they call process owner. It's okay with me. They left out classified add systems engineer. And I have a whole discussion about that in the paper that you're not going to see until it gets accepted and published. Entrepreneur, which fits with this innovator whatever I call it. I'll go look it up again. Innovator initiator. I think that fits with innovator initiator, and security engineer, as I mentioned, which is brand new. So what do we do with all these things? Well, after giving that talk, comparing these two last year, I decided I really need to make my own roles. And I apologize for the ugliness of the next chart. I blame Microsoft for the green, but I had to highlight what my roles were. So here it is. I have ended up coming up with 17 roles. I asked a few of my friends to look it over, and one of them kind of took me out in the back shed and whooped me, saying 17 is too many. And so in response to that whooping, I picked 9 as primary. He said, there are things that you do that if you don't do, you're not doing systems engineering. And that's what he suggested I reduce it to. But I like the other ones too. So I have those black basic ones, and I also have the blue supporting roles. So the 9 supporting roles are coordinator or leaders, and these are in alphabetical order, or at least I guess they're alphabetical order of the abbreviations. Coordinator or leader, security engineer, system modeler, which used to be the system analyst, requirements owner, system architect, and system designer. The interface owner, which used to be the glue, Tom and I will always think of it as glue, technical manager, and V&V. The other ones, and I had no way to say for this security engineer, I had no abbreviation I could use for that wasn't already overloaded. So I changed it to CY. Do you know why? What does CY mean?
Cyber.
Yeah, thank you. Though it should be clear that that's security, right? But this is covering my slide. Okay, system engineering champion, educator, implementation engineer. I'll talk about that. Information manager, innovator, initiator, the life cycle engineer, which I called logistics and ops the first time around. Process owner used to be process engineer, but a bunch of people called it process owner. Let's go with that. Stakeholder interface, which used to be stakeholder interface. Stakeholder interface. Oh, shoot. That's an error. That should say CI. It used to be the customer interface. I don't know why I had it for ST. It should say CI because that's the 96 rule. Darn, I just found an error in my paper. Technical manager and V&V. So that's what they said in the original roles, with the exception of that one, which is wrong. And if you want to see it without the ugliness there. I guess I'll ask for questions because I'll go to
I was
mine
thinking,
first.
sorry, I mean, you've been working a whole lot, with the interface between systems and software, or should I, well, you can treat software as a system too, but I mean, software has been very much your domain. How do you see these roles, if you look at how applicable are they to software engineering?
Okay, well, that reminds me, I did say I'd get into something later, which is implementation engineer. That's a good point, Tom. I have been working closely with software, both my 1995 to 2005 job at the Software Engineering Institute and my last job, which was 2012 to 2019 at the the first one was System and Software Consortium, started out as a Software Productivity Consortium. And the last job at the Software Engineering Institute were in organizations who had software as their first name. So the software engineers think of me as a systems engineer, and it got to the point where the systems engineers thought of me as a software engineer. So nobody claimed me, which is bad because nobody loves me, but it's also good because I could get away with stuff, whatever. But I think I've been looking ahead to the point where systems and software hopefully start working together. I don't see that now. I see the software people thinking of systems as not at all useful. If you just stopped interfering between us and the people with the money, we would thank you very much, go away. But they have the problem of looking, as you might imagine, small. They look at the bits and the bytes and the software modules and not at the customer's problem. So the customer would really much rather give the money to us and have us deal with, are the software people building something that's going to help us? Well, the software architects would like to have a word with us because they think that's their job, making sure that the software that is built will make the customer happy. But there will also be the first people to admit they don't do any of that hardware stuff. They don't do any of the process stuff. They don't do any of the, people stuff. They just do software. And if it's not software related, as one of my systems engineering friends, if it has to do with any of that hardware, they're dripping with contempt. And I do agree that the contempt word is there. So in the systems and software interface working group, which I helped found in 2017, yeah, that was the Australian one. We've been trying to find a way to get them to have anything but maybe not contempt, but skepticism that we have any value at all, systems engineers. We're working on trying to increase their interest in us. But I do see that the systems engineering viewpoint is important, and they don't yet think it is, but they get into trouble that we could help them solve, or we could have prevented had we been there. And you look at our best paper from, was it last year, like 2022, I think, on the Unicorn Project, and it shows that that if we had been there, it would have solved the problems that the whole book is about. Gene Kim, who does not do soft systems engineering, we actually did a book club project on his book, and he came and talked to us at the end. We had an author day with him, and he read our paper, and he thought it was great. But what he ends up in the end of the book saying is that they ended up devising a position called distinguished engineer. And if you look at the characteristics of that position, it basically is, it has these roles. It has the 12 roles in it. That's what they do. It's like, guys, pay some attention. Open your mind to systems engineering. Well, my point being that fifth role there, i.e. implementation engineer, it kind of has the heritage in that classified ad systems engineer. All I did in the 12 roles is say, when I looked in the newspapers, remember newspapers, and tried to find a job in the newspaper classified ad section, the things that wanted systems engineering weren't INCOSE systems engineers. They were something else. I have since discovered that something else is either, would you please administer my computer system? Or would you please do engineering on my my computer system software? One of those two things, or a mixture thereof. But basically, would you do software implementation? And so through some arguments with myself, at the time I submitted the paper anyway, I was of the feeling that we should have at least a space for implementation engineering and systems engineering. We are coming closer to software. You could map these roles to what software engineers do, except they also implement. So I threw in number 5, hoping that one day we'd figure out what implementation means for a systems engineer. But now I think I'm thinking maybe if it gets accepted and they say, you know, make the following changes, maybe I'll take out number 5. I'm not sure.
But looking at this, I mean, it could basically be, I mean, software security engineer, software modeler, software requirements owner, software architect. So how generic, or what's the difference, what's the problem, so to say, to adopt this for software engineering? You think, is it just other words that are being used, Scrum Masters and so on, or
what a great workshop topic.
Yeah, indeed. I think
I got one more slide. Let me go to that slide, and then we can open up questions from everybody. Okay, the bottom line on why I did the new roles was A, it was time. B, once the Germans came up with a modeling engineer and security engineer role, I knew that that was superior to anything I had done, to anything the other ones had done, and they needed to be in there. I came up with 9 basic and 8 supporting roles. These roles include champion, innovator, initiator, implementer, and educator. Those were some of the supporting roles. I did end up splitting designer into designer and architect under pressure, because we don't do detailed design. So to me, it doesn't seem like there's a big difference between architecting and design for systems, but I've been rolled over by the community. So, all right. I did change the name of Glue to interface owner with trepidation. I'm afraid if you call it interface owner, somebody will hand it to a junior person sitting in front of a computer and say, here, own these interfaces, you know, do your n squareds, go down one by one and make sure all the interfaces are clear. And that's not what this should be about. It should be a senior role, owning the what did I call it? The light of the program, making sure that everything really works together. It's not, as Jerry Lake once put it, it's a helicopter. It's not 3,000 parts flying in close formation.
Thanks.
And I changed some other names because the community likes them better, such as lifecycle engineer instead of logistics and ops, and stakeholder interface manager instead of customer interface manager. So that's it. There's
Yeah.
some references there for you. And I've got some backup. Okay. Community questions. Has somebody been looking at the chat? I have not.
Yeah, we had some Joyce raised the issue about the how to close the gap to software engineering or system and software gap. But I mean, I
Okay,
think
so
we can,
you did ask some chat, okay, questions. So I'm gonna stop sharing unless you have some reason why I should, and look at the chat myself. Where is that chat?
well, I think we can actually unmute folks, and you can.
Okay.
This is a chat, so it's not just between Sarah and me, but it's between us, both you out there and us here. So if someone wants to, maybe we should do a bit of practicality. Just raise your hand and unmute. I was gonna say how somebody found a role that they're missing, for example.
I
Maybe,
bet
maybe
there's
we should
not
do
too many.
maybe we should do a poll to see, which roles people are actually.
Okay, now I'm gonna ask a question.
Okay.
First of all, I asked Tom how many people had heard of the original paper.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
How can we
like
tell? Maybe how do we do this poll?
yeah, I should have prepared the poll, I guess, but if we
Is
just
there a
have a
reaction you can do?
hands
Like
up, I think
you can
would
do a
be.
check or an X on the reactions. You can do a check or an X, right?
Yeah, true.
Oh, there's a couple of no's. That's
Yeah.
interesting. In the chat.
But please feel free to ask questions or comments. Maybe what are you? Do these roles resonate with you? Can you how many roles? I mean, that's maybe a question to you, Sarah. I mean, how many roles can you actually perform? Is there some kind of we have the 7 ± 2 rule for roles. How many can you master? You went a bit silent.
Tell you what, I'll put these roles copy into the chat. How's that?
Yeah. So yours, you ask about the roles that Sarah, you are describing are very much in the technical domain. How about roles in the business and market domain? And I think that's maybe a question, how close do we need to be in order?
Well, if it's in the business or market domain, is it really a systems engineering role? At best, I would put it in one of the support roles because I wouldn't put it in the category of if you're not doing it, you're not doing systems engineering.
Yeah, but I think this was also maybe the should I say the concern of some people that systems engineering is becoming too wide. On the other hand, we realize that we cannot just work within the technical domain. I mean, we need to have our insights into business aspects, into social aspects, etc. So any feelings about how broad can we go and still call it systems engineering?
Courtney says, when we considered competency for CSEP, we talked about needing experience in at least 5 roles. Any particular 5 roles or some breadth, but not specified breadth?
Well, I don't know if
none in particular. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, I think there are like 18 or something that you can sort of pick from, and there's a 19th that's called other. I mean, if you claim that this is also systems engineering that you've done, you can argue for that.
Oh, you mean in the CSEP?
Yeah, CSEP. Yeah, when you gotta track your experience against those. I don't think it's called roles there. Courtney, I think it's called competence areas or something. But
she's talking. Well, are you talking these roles or you're talking those competency areas, Courtney?
Well,
Well, we'll
Hey,
wait for,
can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah.
All right, that'll be faster than me typing on my phone. So yeah, what we have right now, I think we call them experience areas. And when we've considered transitioning from quantitative number of months in experience areas into qualitative competency levels in competency areas, which I think have more in common with these roles, we looked at, instead of you have to have at least 12 months deep and at least 3 experience areas, we said you need to be an independent practitioner in at least 3 areas and a supervised practitioner in another 2 or 3 more areas beyond that. I think that has more in common with the roles as you're describing them, Sarah. And we had the same concern that you all are raising, that there are some areas that are very important for a systems engineer to do. But if a systems engineer only does those business functions, that's not a systems engineer. That's someone who's useful in a systems engineering organization.
Oh, interesting. Okay. In other words, the systems engineering organization needs people who are like that, but that doesn't make those people systems engineers.
Yeah, and those are my words, not, an official position or anything, but yes, absolutely. And I think, Sarah, sorry, since I'm part of the conversation now, I'll just share all my thoughts. What you were talking about, Sarah, about the educators and the influencers, those have been some really challenging roles along those same lines that I'm talking about. We need those, we want those, but is that systems engineering if someone only does that?
I'm not sure. Well, and I'm reading at the same time this latest comment about blurring of the roles between systems and software. I'm not sure that we'll ever get the industry to make anything like that clear as a whole. You'd want it clear within your company, at least who's doing what for this project. But my issue with clarifying something is then you're prohibiting overlap, you're prohibiting change, you're prohibiting people from going outside the box. And the last thing you want to do with the systems engineer is prohibit them from going outside any boxes. They're not really systems engineers if they can't blur.
Right. So there, you mean there's a danger in trying to precise the roles too much, or
Yeah.
But in that case, I guess you need to know what are the other roles, because somehow you need to make sure that nothing falls between the cracks between the.
Yeah, the problem with making sure nothing falls between the cracks is that you're going to duplicate effort. Let me give you just a thought here. Studying complexity, which is what I did for my doctorate, which I got in 2012, so it was kind of recent. You study the economies of the US, which is very complex, with what the Soviet Union was trying to do, which is make it all hierarchical and more simple in that sense. So all the bras were made in Poland, which I happen to know for other reasons. All the shoes were made in some, area here. And then, all the shoes would be distributed, as needed across the country, and the bras would be distributed as needed. And we all remember seeing in the 1980s, those of us who are old enough, remember seeing the long lines, because if they ever had any shoe delivery, everybody would rush to get anything, and then maybe they could trade it with somebody for the right size, because there were shortages all over. Now, in the US, and I'm assuming Sweden and any democratic country, there's lots of shoes. There aren't any shoe shortages. You can walk downtown and find, lots of shoe stores trying to sell you shoes. But so you call it an oversupply. There's too many, there's waste. But because of that waste, we have abundance, and we have lots of, the economy works because it allows waste. Now, in systems engineering, we have people trying to make things not fall through the cracks. Do you want to call that But they overlap some with people who also are trying to allow things not to fall through the cracks. Is that waste because two people are checking? There was a time in when I worked for satellites where management was trying to make sure that no two people did the same thing. And the systems engineers were going, wait, we're going to stop having satellites that work if you try to skinny down and make sure nothing is done twice. Because Hughes's satellites were always robust.
Yeah, but I guess, yeah, there's a fine balance between, trying to be lean and still resilient and so and therefore, I mean, I guess, one should really promote taking different roles, or what do you think? I mean,
well, as Courtney said, you're a systems engineer only if you have some breadth. You've done a bunch of different things, because that excess will come in handy when you need it.
right.
Now, who is this saying?
Yeah, that's, and maybe therefore you need to be, doing some, when we talk about the T-shaped engineer, of course, that, have the, with sort of depth, but maybe if you're a mechanical engineer, maybe you should sometimes, step over to the software domain and sort of try to understand even that, and then of course work across the breadth in terms of processes and so on. But
there are a few of the young systems engineers who were software engineers. And I don't know to what extent there are software engineers who used to be mechanical, especially mechanical. There's some who used to be electrical. But I think that's what's going to help us answer this last question that came in. How, for example, how are those system roles aligned with Agile development process roles? I haven't done enough Agile, even though I've worked in these software organizations. I haven't done Scrum team type roles. I've been debating whether I should start getting involved with the Agile. I know that in the companies themselves, there is no big issue between Agile and what the software engineers I work with in consulting companies call the systems engineering process, with that gesture, those systems engineers, they're so waterfall, they're so old-fashioned, everything they do is useless. But the companies know that the client needs to work on a budget, and they need to work according to the government schedule, and they need to make promises that something's going to be done by a certain date, yada, yada. They have these constraints, and the companies know how to deal with this. They're building software for government clients all the time. And it's only us, for the most part, it's the academics that have an issue with, I have to ignore those systems engineers because they're useless. The companies can do this. Why can't we academics get together the way the companies are doing it? So I would ask, is this person Tan Truong Fuse? Do you work for a company? Or are you like me, an academic?
it's okay to unmute if you want.
Because I assume if you are an academic, you don't know, but if you work for a company, that it's working there. And I don't know how that is. And meanwhile, I'm going to go on to the next question as well. I may have missed or misunderstood the message. Is there a goal for what the definitions are to be used for and by who? In my paper, I have something like 15 potential uses for these definitions, most of which are the ways that the paper has been used for the last 28 years. And if they're going to be more internationally recognized, excuse me, is there any idea how that should be done? And those are suggested. One of my friends who reviewed my paper said, well, why don't you do this, this, and this with standards and with the digital engineering something or other. I certainly couldn't do that especially within the word limit, which I bumped up against until I cut other things out and bumped up again and cut them. But I think that to the extent that people find the paper useful, which I have to assume they do if they keep reading it and they keep citing it, that there is a use for it. Now, if that's so useful, then maybe it should be kind of made more formal. Maybe not, though. I don't know. If it is going to be made more formal, there are suggestions how that can be done, how it has been used in the past, and maybe it should be continued in the future in this format, with these new roles.
But if I read you right, and then over the years as well, I mean, that you have not tried to push things to be very strict formal, because things are changing, and it's more therefore, absorbing and tailor it to your situation and give some insights to what could be potential roles.
Well, when I was a consultant, companies would come to me and say, I have your paper. Can you help me organize how we do systems engineering based on your paper? And the first thing I would do is say, okay, requirements. Who does what kind of requirements in your company? Okay, analysis. Who does what kind of analysis in your company? And we go down this using it as a checklist for how do you do these roles. And then we put the paper away and we work with what they do. So it's not really who should do anything. It's just a bunch of buckets, is the way I see it. I think the reason the paper was famous is because it reads non-technically. It uses simple, friendly words. It doesn't have a lot of references that you have to look up per mill standard something or other,
Yes. Let's see if we have covered. Did somebody who wants think that there was a question about the
well, can I ask anybody who works in a company who uses agile development, how does that work with systems engineering roles? They're not here, right? They're off doing their scrum meetings.
I think they're just shy to step up. You normally could step up to something like that.
I'm not working in a company. I work a lot with companies. This is yours from the Netherlands.
Right.
I know that many of our partners are going somewhat back to the waterfall.
Really?
Yeah, Agile did not bring what it promised at system level.
Fascinating. Because the companies are tired of having little bits and bits and pieces of this, but not the whole picture, maybe?
I think so. And then there is still the discipline, the differences between hardware and software. And so it's had to do with software, hardware, and system. The rhythm, things like that. But so it's a balancing act, and it's shifting a little bit back.
I'm fascinated by that comment. It's the first I've ever heard that. So thank you. Anybody else?
And I think that goes with, that maybe it's been too abundant. I mean, like I've heard I've seen some videos where people say requirements, that's a Stone Age, requirements is something cast in stone. We don't do that. We agile. And I think, first of all, it's a misinterpretation in that sense. But then also, I mean, if you don't have a good architect that gives some kind of guidance where you're going, I think, you may have speed, but it's like orienteering. I mean, if you want to go from A to B, and speed is useful, but if you don't have, a map and the compass and the direction, you won't really get there anyway. So maybe that's what's actually, waterfall. I mean, again, that's also a misinterpretation that there's even the original paper by Rose was not about doing things in a waterfall fashion. He was really trying to point out that you need to have these feedback loops and so on. So I don't know if people really ever do sort of pure waterfall. I mean, so in my sense.
I'm writing down your book recommendation, Johan.
Yeah. And we have a question also from Kanika here.
How do you foresee some of these roles changing or evolving with the use of data models, AI, and so on? I don't think I'm smart enough to answer this question.
Well, I think
I'll have to think about it.
Yeah. Well, certainly a lot of this information gathering will be facilitated. I think maybe the role is still there, but you know.
Integrated product support or formal IS engineer. I agree with Jacob. Life cycle engineer sounds right. Thank you. It's more difficult than decomposition.
So maybe with the rise of AI, etc., maybe the roles wouldn't change that much, but the way you do the roles will certainly change or will change. But that's
composing the role of into multiple sub roles. Any experience and challenges where they meet. Woo.
I'm reading out the question here just so for the recording. In system integration is often more difficult in system. SCS integration is often more difficult than decomposition. You have decomposed the roles of SC into multiple sub-roles and experience in the challenges where typical sub-roles meet.
Well, all I can say is you have a team of systems engineers that need to get the systems engineering work done. Your team has to have a way of working together and splitting up the tasks and saying who's doing what and talking about the challenges. Either take the software attitude of a daily stand-up meeting of who has issues for today and a weekly task meeting or tickets or something. I don't have experience in the challenges. The only systems engineering teams that I've been on have always had weekly or other periodic meetings where they talk about issues that have come up. It's not really according to roles because, for example, modeling engineer is a role. Everybody does modeling. Security engineer, everybody better be doing security. So I would imagine that there's some sort of a structure around a modeling engineer knowing who's doing what modeling, or the security engineer's primary role being knowing where the security is being implemented and how.
Right. I think
in the paper, I do talk about for each role, what roles they interface with and who has to work, in particular, like system architect and system designer. You guys better have a pretty close relationship if you have two different people doing those different things.
Okay. I
guess we're done, huh? That went fast.
Yeah, time flies, and then I think it's 4:00 p.m. here in Sweden, and you are still on early morning. So
I do have a Gmail. My name, Sarah with an H .Sheard @Gmail. If anybody wants to contact me.
Yeah, and it's putting back this slide and
Okay. So Sarah .Sheard, dot in the middle @Gmail is how you get me.
Yeah. So you will share your slides to Sarah? Is that okay?
Yeah, you can share the slides.
Yeah, and then also we have the recording that will be posted on our website. So with that, thank you so much, Sarah, for this little chat and then the insights to roles. And again, I mean, maybe the conclusion is that roles are changing and they are overlapping, etc. But this gives you an idea and some help in order to define your own roles, I guess.
I'm sure Tom would be happy to send you the original paper.
Yes, I mean, we should put that into the recording, or with the recording, yes. So with that, thank you all, and as we say in Swedish, God jul and gott nytt år. You know, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and we'll see each other in January. Next event coming up will be announced. So with that, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, all participants. See you 2024. Right. Good. Stop the recording here.